Tomatoes are my absolute favorite thing in the whole entire world. Most of my friends are kind of weirded out sometimes because of how many tomatoes I eat. I can't think of anything else that smells like, feels like, tastes like summer more than a tomato. And canning is the best way that I could ever imagine that will help capture that lovely essence of summer so that it gets you through the not so cheerful and sunny and bright days of January and February. And like Lauren said, canning tomatoes is not only simple, but it's a nice staple to have in your pantry. I usually can a couple hundred jars of tomatoes, but like I mentioned to some of you earlier, I love tomatoes, and I can a lot of tomatoes. If you're not a major canner and you just want a few jars of tomatoes in your pantry, not a problem. The cool thing about the recipe that we're going to walk through right now is you can do this for 1 or 2 jars, or you can do this for 100 or 200 jars. And the sauce that Lauren mentioned that I'm also going to show you how to make, you can either make that with the cans of tomatoes that you're going to make, or you can actually make the sauce and can that. So either way, we're going to walk through that for you. Some of the things that we need for our recipe, just basic everyday kitchen utensils. You're going to want to have a spoon in order to help get your jars down, or your tomatoes down inside the jar, which we're going to show you how to do. You also want to make sure that you have a knife. I'm going to show you how to blanch your tomatoes. So speaking of that, you want to have a pot of hot water already going and some sort of basket. The basket that I'm actually using today is the one that we had out earlier. It's the basket from the Ball Discovery Canning Kit, and that's going to help us be able to get our tomatoes down in the water. I'm using my canner as my pot of water to blanch my tomatoes in, and then we're done blanching our tomatoes, it's going to turn into our canner. So let me tell you a little bit what makes a canner is it is a large heavy bottom stock pot. It has a heavy duty lid that's going to help hold in all of the heat, and the item that comes with your Ball stainless steel canner is a rack. The rack is pretty important. It keeps your jars from hanging out and having direct contact with the extreme heat at the bottom of your pot. And it also comes with handles, pretty simple. Helps you lower your jars down into the water, and then also when the processing time's over, it's going to help you take those right out of the water as well. So we have our canner going for both our blanching and later for our canning. Another everyday item that you're going to need, a slotted spoon. And that's because after we get done blanching our tomatoes, putting them in that hot water, we're going to be putting them into ice cold water, and having a slotted spoon is going to help you pull that out of there. When it comes time to make our pasta sauce, we're going to need our ladle. So I do have my ladle here. A cutting board in order to cut up all the yummy tomatoes. A bowl for our ice water, and then our canning specific tools that we need are pretty handy and pretty helpful in order to get the job done. One is the Sure-Tight band tool. That's going to help to ensure that our band is tight and our lid is nice and secure on our jar before we put it in the water. Don't worry, I'll show you how to use that. We also have a funnel. Funnel is really handy because it's going to ensure that tomatoes aren't flying all over the place across your countertop. It's going to allow you to ladle or get all your product right down inside of your jar and free you up from a lot of cleanup. Because again, canning is pretty simple. Why take the extra steps and make a big mess? Just use tools in order to get the job done the right time, the first time. And other than that, our other canning specific tool that we're going to use is our 2-piece tool. It is a bubble freer. You didn't know we were freeing bubbles today, did you? It's pretty important that you free your bubbles. And I'll show you how with this tool. The bottom end that I'm holding helps to get down inside the jar and free all the bubbles up. The other part of this tool is the stair-step measurement that you see here on the bottom. That's because whenever we can our food, we want to make sure that there's headspace. Headspace is basically the air space that's between the top of your product, so our tomatoes today, and the very top rim of the jar. And that's because as the can goes into the water and that product starts to heat up, it's going to expand a little bit, and the recipe has been calculated so that there's a specific measurement of that airspace at the top that we want to have that allows the food to expand and push out the air to get rid of any airborne bacteria that's in there. But it also, as the jar cools and finishes processing, it's it's going to create a good sturdy vacuum seal. So you basically are going to have food in there and then a negative space at the top and your tight lid that's already been sealed on the top. And this tool helps you get all of those steps done. And our jars are over in a crock pot. They're getting nice and warm. They've already been cleaned with hot soapy water. You can either do that by hand or you can put it in your dishwasher. Even though they're clean and we've washed them with soap, we want to make sure that they're hanging out either in your canner with your hot water, or like I said, I have a crock pot here that's needed in order to help sterilize the jar and prep the glass so that when we put our two-piece lid on it, it can heat up the sealant inside of the lid and create a nice tidy seal. And instead of putting my hand in scalding hot water to pull those jars out, I've got this handy tool here. This is my jar lifter. That's going to help pull all of those hot jars out and help me put them into the canner while keeping my hands nice and safe. Any questions so far about tools before we jump right into processing our tomatoes?
Are all the tools available?
I'll let Kristen come over here real quick.
Are all the tools available online through your Can It Forward?
Yes, great question. All of the tools are available at freshpreserving.com. The recipes that we've shown today, the one that I'm getting ready to show as well, those are all also available on there. In addition to that, you can walk right next door into the orchard shop and you can get a lot of these tools as well. Fabulous question. Any others? All right. Well, let's go ahead and start with our tomatoes. Like I mentioned, we're going to blanch them. Blanching, if you're not familiar, may sound daunting, but it's really easy. Basically, after our tomatoes have been washed, what we want to do is put them into hot water, not boiling, but just a nice simmer going on with your water. See, canning is so easy. You also get a beautiful facial at the same time. Two jobs in one. So my clean tomato, what I'm going to do is put it in a basket so that way you don't have to fish them out from the bottom of the pot. Got my Ball Discovery canning basket. I'm going to put that down inside, just let it hang out on the bottom of the pot in the basket. Go ahead and add another one there. And what's happening is for about 30 seconds to a minute, the outermost part of the tomato, just underneath the skin, is softening up enough and expanding enough so that the skin is going to start to crack. Now, one of the things that you can do to help get the cracking of the skin to go along a little bit faster is you can cut an X right across the blossom end of your tomato. And that's going to help get some of that hot water in there and allow it to come off. So I'll go ahead and put that one in there, and then I'll show you the difference between it. The main reason why we're blanching our tomatoes is that skin over time, not only will it just give an odd texture to some of the foods that you're probably going to use your canned tomatoes for, but it's going to peel and it's going to start causing some floating in your jar. And the great thing about a canning jar is it's clear. It's kind of a big boost of pride just hanging out in a jar in your pantry for you. It's something that you can give to somebody and say, hey, look what I made. And you don't want to give them something with lots of floaties in there. You want to give them something that looks very pretty and captures the bright, vibrant colors of the tomatoes. So go ahead and take that skin off. Speaking of which, these are probably ready to come out. Let me check that. Got a little bit more to go. Depending on how ripe your tomatoes are, it may take a little more time or a little less. So this isn't something you put them in and then run and go have a quick break or something. You want to hang out and keep an eye on your tomatoes. Otherwise, they're going to start to get really mushy in there. Got a bowl of ice water in here. Just add some ice to it. What this is going to do is it's going to shock this hot tomato once we put in the ice, and it's going to cause all of the expansion that's happening right now in the pot. It's going to shrink back up, and all of that loose skin that started to crack and peel off, it's going to be very easy for us to peel off of there and get to the actual tomato fruit. Got a little bit longer. You also can kind of tell that you're getting close because you'll start to smell the tomato. Beyond the actual raw tomato smell itself, if you've ever cooked anything tomato, you can start to tell that a lot of those sugars get released when it gets heated up, and that's what I'm smelling right now. It's letting me know that a lot of it's starting to expand and release. You'll also sometimes see some bubbles popping up from the core end. That also lets you know that everything inside's heating up. Some of the gases that are inside the tomato are actually starting to come out of the food. Any questions while I'm getting ready to pull these out about tomatoes or? Oh, Kristen, we've got one back here.
One more.
Now, the process that you're doing right now, isn't it just referred to as blanching your fruit?
Right.
Or your vegetables?
Yes, so the question is, what I'm doing here, is it just referred to as blanching? And yes, that's all we're doing right now is blanching our fruit, blanching our tomatoes. Okay. Oh, we've got another one up here.
Does it matter how many tomatoes you put in at a time? Is it like bad to overcrowd the basket or something of that nature?
Good question. So if you didn't hear, is it bad to overcrowd the basket with too many tomatoes? Pretty much one layer at a time. If you notice, I didn't fill my basket and precariously put them down in there. Just a couple at a time. If you have a larger basket or like a spider, a kitchen utensil called a spider that you want to use, that would work as well. But yeah, pretty much just one layer at a time, because these are not hot. This is hot. And if you put too much of the room temperature tomatoes in there, what's going to happen is the temperature of your water is going to come down. So you're constantly going to be cranking up the heat or backing it off. And in order to save your time, just keep it nice and consistent. The other thing is that you don't want to have a backlog of too many tomatoes hanging out in your ice water. You don't want to give them a chance to soak up ice water. So doing just a little at a time is going to allow you to work in small batches.
One more question over here.
Great.
About how many tomatoes does it take to do a pint size and how many to do a quart size?
Good question. Good question. So about how many tomatoes does it take to fill a jar? We are using quart-size jar today, and we're using a wide-mouth quart-size jar. That's going to give us ample room to actually put the tomatoes in there and get in there and be able to press on them to help them release their juice. For a quart-size jar, on average for the size of tomatoes, I have about 8 to 11 tomatoes will go into a jar. And what I'm doing is a quartered tomato. Obviously, if you were doing something more like a crushed or a diced tomato, it's going to take more tomatoes because you're squeezing everybody in there. For a pint, then, that would be half of that. So about 4 to 6 is a good average for a pint size. Good question. All right. So we'll get our tomatoes down in there. And I will warn you, these are hot. Tomatoes have a lot of liquid in there. So give them a chance to cool off. And I don't know if you guys can tell, either at home or right now by looking up in the mirror, but the tomatoes did crack. And as soon as I put them in the ice water, I started to see all the skins wrinkle up and start to pull back. That's what I want to see. If for some reason you put them in the ice water and nothing has cracked, where you made your cut on the blossom end, it hasn't started to peel back, you can put those back in there. That's not a problem. So we'll go ahead and use this one here. You guys all see that cracking on the skin there? That's exactly what we're looking for. So what we're going to do, everybody that I know seems to do this a little bit different. The main thing is the process that you're trying to include here, which is removing the blossom, the stem end, the core. We've got that out. And if you don't like the blossom end on there, some people are particular, you can cut that off. You always want to try to use, anytime you're canning, some nice, good, healthy, unbruised product. You don't want to can something that started to deteriorate and maybe end up really soft tomatoes. But if you happen to see any kind of blemish on there, this would be the time that you'd want to go ahead and cut that off. You all see how easy that was? The skin just slipped right off. Tomatoes are one of the messier things that you probably could can, so another good reason to have a nice large cutting board to help collect all the juice that's going to come off of there. As I mentioned, we're going to do a quartered tomato today. So it's simply cut in half and then cut in half again, and they're ready to go. They're ready for us to put into our jar. So speaking of which, get the top off of my crock pot and get my jar lifter tool. Again, if you were using your canner as the place that you were heating up your jars, it would be the same thing. You lift up with your jar and then give it a tilt to pour all the water out. Now our nice sterilized hot jar is ready to go. Going to use our funnel and I cheated again, if that's okay. Got some prepped already. All right, so our funnel is going to allow us to take our tomatoes and put them down in there. You can use a spoon if you want. I personally use my hands. If you notice I didn't seed the tomatoes, you don't have to. Depending on what I want to use my tomatoes for, sometimes I'll take the seeds out. I do find that over time, sometimes the seeds can turn a little bit bitter in the jar. If you were to seed your tomato, especially after you've quartered it, I recommend you just take one of your favorite tools, the back of your thumb. This little seed pouch is what you want to pull out of there, and now your seeds are gone. I will let you know that if you seed your tomatoes, it will cut down on some of the liquid. And the tomatoes that we're using today are tomatoes packed in their own juice. And that's how we're getting our juice. You see that? And just put them into the jar, give them a little bit of a squeeze. That's going to help me pack those down in there. All right, got a room for a couple more to go in there.
We have a question from the audience.
Wonderful.
Does it matter if the tomatoes have cooled down all the way or if they're still warm from the bath?
Good question. So she's wondering, does it matter if the tomatoes have cooled down from the blanching process? And no, that doesn't matter. These tomatoes basically are raw. So if you saw the pickle demo that we just did a little bit ago, I talked about a raw pack. Basically, just like the cucumbers were raw when I put them into the hot jar and I poured hot brine over them, same thing's happening with my tomatoes here. These basically are raw. I'm going to pack those into the jar, and they're going to have an hour and 25 minutes in the canner to heat up and actually cook. All right. Now that my tomatoes are in the jar, what I'm looking for on my measurement tool is a 1/2 inch headspace. Again, I'm going to find where that 1/2 inch measurement is, put it on the top rim of my jar, and what I'm looking for is to ensure that there isn't anything in the way as far as tomato or juice that goes above or below that 1/2 inch mark. That's a specific measurement that allows for expansion to get that out of there. It looks like we've got a question here.
Do we need to add salt or a little sugar?
Great question. The question is, do you have to add any sugar or salt? No, you don't have to. The sugar and salt is totally up to you for flavor. However, I have to tell you, I did skip a step. The glory of doing a demo. Tomatoes, they are an acidic food, but tomato varieties have changed. And one of the things that you'll see in recipes is to add lemon juice or citric acid. And Ball has come out with citric acid that is in this nice size container. It allows you to measure out enough for each jar. Again, I apologize. You would pour this in the bottom of your jar so that your tomatoes go on top of it and it mixes in. And what you're going to add is 1/2 teaspoon per quart. If you want to use lemon juice, you're welcome to do that. Just be aware it's lemon juice. It's going to give you a little bit of a lemon flavor. Go ahead and put that in there. Mix it down in. So I measured my headspace, and I told you this was a 2-part tool. Got my bubble freer. My bubble freer or bubble remover. I'm going right between the tomatoes and the jar, and I'm pulling toward the middle of my jar so that any chance of air bubbles that got trapped in between all of those tomatoes, they're going to pop up toward the top. Now, as you can see, some tomatoes will try to escape on you. Don't let them run away. You'll miss them come January. All right, and you can always just push those back down in. I love the stair step because it's kind of good for gripping and pushing everything down in there. If you had lots of bubbles come up, it's always a good idea to remeasure. So find that 1/2 inch space again and make sure that you are meeting that. Now that you're ready to put your lid on, don't just slap it on there. You want to make sure that everything is removed from this top rim. This tiny little bit of glass is what is going to hold the lid on. That's the only point of contact. So you want to make sure that that's nice and clean. Use a clean part of either a dish towel or a dampened paper towel and go around a couple of times, each time with a new part of your rag to ensure that everything's off of there. Then you're ready to apply your 2-piece lid. 2-piece lid, I got to tell you, it comes with surprise, surprise, two parts. One is the band. The band is a one-shot deal as far as it has one job, and that is to hold the lid into place just during the processing time. The other part is this piece. The lid itself is a one-time use only. You want to make sure that you use it just for this one processing and then get rid of it after that. The band and the jar itself, you can use those over and over again. Just make sure you wash them and check for any nicks or scratches or bend marks in them. Now that I've cleaned that off, I put my lid into place, loosely put my band on, and I told you I had a special tool with me today, the Ball Sure-Tight band tool. Open it up. Fits both traditional mouth jars as well as wide mouth. Snugly put that into place, fold it closed. On the top here I have two arrows, so I'm going to keep cranking until my arrows match, which they've done right there. And what that does is it means that both my husband and I, or even my kids and I, can can together, and it doesn't matter if you have strong hands or weak hands, especially if you have arthritis or something. This tool is really going to help you out. It's going to allow you to tighten that without having to twist and be in any kind of discomfort. Now that my tomatoes are in the jar, I'm ready to put them into my canner. Got my basket, and I can sit that right up on top. Take my jar with the jar lifter right around the top edge of the jar and sit that down in there. If I were filling other jars, I would go ahead and do that, and then use my jar lifter and put those down in until I had it filled with as many jars as I'm processing. Now with these handles, just going to move those off the edge, let the handles fall to the center part of the canner, put my lid on, and the good thing about this canner is it has a clear glass lid, so that way I can see down inside. And that's because we're going to process these for 1 hour and 25 minutes. That is from the time that it starts boiling, not from the time that I put the lid on. So being able to look in there to see when I come to a full boil, that's when I'm going to start my time. Obviously, we're not going to can for a whole 1 hour and 25 minutes, so we'll pretend that this is canning while we take a question.
Well, it seems to have a lot of questions, but how much water is in that large pot? Is it a quarter, halfway, 3/4 full?
Very good question. So she was curious how much water is in my canner. The water that goes in there, it depends on the size of your jar. We're doing a quart-sized jar, so I need to make sure I have enough water in there that when I put my filled jars in, it's going to go 1 to 2 inches over the top of my sealed jar. What you can do is, on average, fill your pot about 3/4 of the way, because you're going to have water displacement. When you put your full jar in there, it's going to push your water level up. But if you put your jars in, you notice that you need to take out some water or add some, not a problem. Just add your hot water and make sure, again, covering about 1 to 2 inches. So we've got that going. I'm going to show you something you can do with your tomatoes. Again, you can either do this with your canned tomatoes. Come a couple months from now, when you take them out of your pantry, you can open up a jar and use it this way. Or instead of canning the tomato, you can turn your tomatoes into tomato sauce. So that's what we'll do here. Ball has the Italian style pasta sauce mix in a jar. This is another flex batch product that basically means you can make a couple jars or you can make a lot of jars. And it's a seasoned mix that's going to go right with your tomatoes. Again, either fresh tomatoes or home canned tomatoes or even store-bought canned tomatoes. So I do have some crushed tomatoes here. If you like a chunky sauce, you can use crushed tomatoes, or you can even use a diced tomato out of the jar. If you like a runnier sauce, then what you can use is a food processor or an immersion blender and chop all the bits of your tomato up. Just smells so fabulous. Put that down in there. Get my burner on here. I'm going to heat this up, and the amount of tomatoes I have in there is equal to 1 quart size jar or 2 pint size jars, which means I need 1/3 cup of the seasoning mix. The good thing about having the jar at a flex batch, If you like a very strong flavor, you can add a little more. If you like a little less, add a little less. It's your stuff. You add it in as you like it. Mix that in there. And I believe Holly's coming around with some samples on some French bread for you. How's it taste? Yeah. Just going to stir that up. And don't worry. Oh.
Is it just a mixture of parsley and oregano and...
Yeah, so her question is what all is in the seasoned mix. It is a variety of Italian spices. Oregano, parsley, there's some green pepper bits in there, some basil, some garlic, of course. So yeah, it's a very traditional flavor Italian style sauce that it makes. That's as simple as it is. Literally, tomatoes and seasoned mix, boom. You have homemade pasta sauce that you know exactly what went into it, and you don't have to worry about going to the store, especially if you've already canned the tomatoes. They were in your pantry. Just pull those out, and you have a fresh tomato sauce in order to enjoy. Again, you can use this as is, or you can go ahead and can this. It would be the same type of process that we did with our tomatoes. We're going to fill up our jars and then put those in the canner. And all the steps are on the container. It'll walk you through what to do for that as far as your processing time and everything else. Oh, we've got a question over here.
Do you have to use the canned tomatoes to do the sauce, or can you use the fresh ones?
Very good question. So she wanted to know, do you have to use canned tomatoes to make the sauce, or can you use fresh ones? Yes and yes. You can use fresh and canned. If it was canned, just like what I used, you open up your jar, put it in a pan, and go from there. Or if it was fresh, if I had just finished blanching my tomatoes, I would put these into a skillet. I'd probably go ahead and chop them up, either smaller for diced if I like a heartier sauce, or like I mentioned, put it into a food processor and make a nice smooth sauce. And then I would be at this same step. I would cook it in my pan and then add my seasoned mix from there. We've got another one.
How long can you keep your home canned goods in your pantry before you should dispose of them if you don't use them all?
Sure, great question. So how long can you keep your canned good items in your pantry? I get that question all the time. For the most part, you want to keep these no more than about a year. And honestly, I challenge you to see if it even lasts that long, especially if it's something as yummy as the pasta sauce or even just fresh tomatoes. When you're canning, these are more than likely going to be things that you're giving to people or that you're eating on a regular basis. Hopefully you're canning things that you enjoy and you're not canning things that you don't really care for, or at least somebody in your house. So that means it's something that you're going to use. But yes, if you certainly find that you have a very full pantry and you have jars hanging out in your pantry, 1 year is a good time frame. Speaking of 1 year, when you are done processing your jars, we'll go through the steps with that. Ding, your timer comes off. Our hour and 25 minutes is done. We turn off our heat and we want to allow this to sit for 5 minutes just so everything can settle down a little bit. It's very, very hot in there, a high rolling boil. You don't want any of that to splash up on you. So you give it a chance to rest for 5 minutes. Take the lid off. Open your pores. And again, with our jar lifter, we're going to reach in, get the handles. They're nice and cool, so don't worry about getting burned from those. Then you use your jar lifter on your hot jar. You're going to lift that straight up. I'll let you know water will hang out on the top of the lid. You don't want to tilt it. I know your brain is telling you tilt and get that water off, but this isn't fully sealed yet. So you want to make sure that you just lift straight up. Don't worry about that water. That's why you have plenty of dish towels on hand, and then you can pat that off. Leave these to sit on your counter for 12 to 24 hours, and then when you're all done, what you're going to do is take off the band. Wipe down your jar just in case anything got on the outside of it during the processing time. Ensure that you have a good seal, and you can do that by lifting up on your lid. If it doesn't come off, success to you. The other way to check is by pushing on the actual top part of the lid and making sure that you don't hear any popping sound and that it's not moving up or down. That lets you know that the seal has been made. If for some reason it didn't seal, not to worry, you can process it again. Just take off the lid, wipe the rim, and put a new lid on it. Or you can put it in your refrigerator, and about 3 weeks is a good time frame that it can last for. Write the date in which you made this so that you do have that 1 year time frame you have a start time. So you're not digging through your pantry and going, I don't remember when I made pasta sauce or when I made tomatoes. You'll have the date on there, and go ahead and label it as to what it is, because a whole line of a bunch of red jars, you may forget which one's crushed tomatoes or pasta sauce. Go ahead and label it and help yourself out later on. We've got another question here.
Yes, if you use a pressure cooker, would the food last longer on storage than the method that you're using here?
That is a great question. So he's curious. I'm using the hot water bath canning method here. You certainly can process your tomatoes, and definitely any low acid food has to be processed through a pressure canning process. The time processing is a little bit different, but your shelf life is still the same. It doesn't matter if it was pressure canned or if it was hot water bath canned. Food will eventually break down in your jar. 1 year, it's not going to break down. After that, it will start to break down and potentially either leave you with a not so beautiful and tasty tomato inside, or worse, one that maybe could make you sick. So that 1 year time frame is a really nice thing to make sure that you're staying healthy and you just continue to have beautiful tomatoes in your jar.